Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I've just come from the best month of reading that I've had for a very long time. I was off work for a bit this month and it was really good weather, so I've been able to sit in the garden on the sun lounger reading a book, add in my usual reading at night, audiobooks in the car and just general free time around the house, and I've managed to get through 14 books and across a massive range of genres. And there's been some really exciting reads in there, so I thought I'd like to do a bit of a monthly wrap-up. A quick write-up on each book, what they're about, and do they come with my recommendation. Now before we do that, if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back. If you're new to my channel, this channel is all about reading, writing and creative endeavours. I do hope you will stick around. Now the first book that I read this month was Tell No One by Harlan Coben. Harlan Coben is your kind of classic page-turner thriller writer. I haven't read loads by Harlan Coben, but I have read a few recently. They're the kind of book that I like to throw in every now and then, particularly when I'm coming off the back of a really heavy read. They're the kind of book that could get you out of a slump if you ever feel that you just don't have the energy to sit down and read a hard work book. They are always upping the stakes and there's always a really interesting twist at the end of the book. That being said, they don't always come with the same nuance as some of the other books that I might be likely to read. Now, Tell No One is all about a grieving husband. He's mourning the loss of his wife. He lost her on the anniversary of their marriage. They've been married about a year and they were having a romantic getaway on a secluded lakeside location when she was brutally killed by an attacker. He was attacked during the incident. He was hit with a baseball bat and left unconscious in the lake, left to die. But actually he managed to scramble himself to safety and call the police, but he never found his wife's body. Now when we pick up the story, some time has passed, but David Beck hasn't been able to get over the loss of his wife. Then one day he receives a coded message in an email. The subject of the email has a kind of in-joke that only his wife would have understood. No one else could have possibly written something like that. Or could they? That really gets him engaged. It comes with a hyperlink that he has to click, but it only works at a certain time. So he waits until that time and he hits the hyperlink. And what he sees turns his world upside down. He sees CCTV of his wife, recent CCTV of his wife, alive. That then launches an exciting chain of events to try and help him find out what has actually happened to his wife. I have to say, I really did enjoy this book. It's nothing too challenging, but it really does get you engaged. I feel like Harlan Coben is a master of that kind of craft. If you like books by people like Dan Brown, David Baldacci, James Patterson, Lee Child, then this is the kind of book you're likely to love. It's a very enjoyable but probably quite throwaway kind of experience. My second book was an audiobook and I really enjoyed listening to this one. It's quite a stark contrast to the previous book and it really did feel like I had a few takeaways from it. I've actually spoken about this on another list. It was called This Could Be Us by Claire McGowan. This tells the story of Kate, a young woman who finds herself married with a small family. That family includes a heavily disabled daughter. This makes life quite challenging for Kate. That's a really tough experience. She finds it really hard to connect with her daughter. She's really not getting much back. The child can't speak, can't do anything for itself. It relies entirely on her. When she meets someone who gives her the opportunity to flee to America, she takes that opportunity and leaves no trace. This leaves her husband to raise her daughter alone. Well, what actually happens is he raises those children with the help of Kate's previous best friend, Olivia. Now years later, and Kate is married to a successful film producer. That film producer ends up picking up a book from England to turn into a movie. That book is written by Andrew, Kate's previous husband. The book is all about the challenges, struggles, and eventually the successes of raising that heavily disabled daughter. This brings up lots of challenges for Kate. She struggled with the guilt of leaving for many years, but she never decided to go back, and she never even got in touch with any of the family that she left behind. So obviously there's a lot of open wounds there, and it's a really unusual circumstance for everyone involved. Now this was a great book. Obviously it can be rough at points because it's touching on some very heavy subjects, but I think it's really well written. You often hear the reverse, where the man goes away. You know how it goes, he goes out for a pint of milk and never comes back again, leaving the wife to raise the children. I really recommend this book, it is well worth picking up. There are no characters that you can really well engage with because they're all kind of heavily flawed in their own way, which does make it kind of a struggle. But I have to say it is worth putting in the time and effort for that struggle because it is a really good read. My third book was a little bit different. This is a celebrity autobiography. I do like to throw those in every now and then. This one is by Seth Rogen, the actor, producer, comedy writer, comedian. You probably know him quite well. This was a really good book. I was well impressed. It charts his kind of late childhood, early adulthood as he kind of emerges onto the Hollywood scene and kind of how he manages those situations. It's got some really interesting stories in there. Now I started off reading this as a Kindle book, but But in fact, I spoke to a couple of people who'd already read it and they said, no, you've got to switch to Audible for this one because it's done really well. There's a massive cast of people in the book, but it's all his story. And it's really interesting the way it's done. It's like 99% Seth Rogen, but it features about 50 different celebrities. And every time it will just be for a really short instance, but they do it really well. For example, there'll be a scene where he meets Kanye West, and Kanye West does something typically mad because he's Kanye West. But rather than Seth Rogen reading out Kanye West's mad line, they actually cut to Kanye West saying it himself. And this is continued right throughout. They've got people like Snoop Dogg. There's a scene with some kind of random stoner, and rather than just using some unknown voice, they use Tommy Chong. It's really well done, and it really does add to the experience without making it seem like a kind of farcical experience. You're still getting Seth Rogen's story. My fifth book is a book I picked up from Waterstones, just doing a little tour. I didn't know what to expect of it. I'd never heard of it, but it looks really interesting. It's called Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson. Now, it came with a little badge here saying it's a Barack Obama summer read. I'd never read anything recommended by Barack Obama. I thought it could be interesting. It's got some good accolades on the back. Time called it the book of the year. Absolutely jaw-dropping. Just looked like it could be really interesting. Now, this is quite a good story. It's told through the medium of a friend meeting an old friend in an airport lounge, and they start catching up over what they've done over the years. That then leads to Jeff, the main protagonist in this book, talking through the main story. He tells of a time he was out swimming in a beach when he sees someone struggling to swim. They're clearly in a lot of trouble and he needs to pull them to safety. He does so, and then he needs to give emergency CPR. When he's got the man back to consciousness, emergency services make it over, and they are very clear that if he didn't intervene, this man would have died. That has quite a big impact on Jeff, and it leaves him asking questions about the man that he's enabled to stay in this world. Would that man recognise him later? Would he want to thank Jeff? Has he enabled him to go on and do some really profound things to have a really good impact on the world? Or even, would he have been better off leaving this man to die? So Jeff does something a little bit odd. He almost begins to stalk this man. He sees where he works. He sees that he's clearly quite a wealthy man. He runs an art gallery. He appears to be quite well known around the town. And when they eventually get the opportunity to meet, he doesn't recognise Jeff, and Jeff actually gets the opportunity to apply to work for him. Over time, their relationship becomes closer, and Jeff has even more questions about this man he's gone on to save. Now, this is a really interesting book. It's kind of odd, it's a weird premise, but I think it's really well written. I got through it in absolutely no time at all. I do think you will really enjoy it. It does raise some really profound questions about morality and someone's impact on the wider world, and I do think there's a lot to take from it. Definitely check this one out if you haven't already. My fifth book was a bit of a departure from my usual reading. We've got a bit of non-fiction here. We've got a collection of essays by a man called Milan Kundera. The book is called A Kidnapped West, and I chose it because I found this cover to be really interesting, and it just led me to pick it up, have a little dive in. I thought, you know, it's only a short book, maybe there could be some really good takeaways from it. And I'm really glad I read it. Milan Kundera is a Czech writer. These are a collection of essays from the kind of late 60s, early 70s. It's all about those Central European countries. You've got the Czech Republic, you've got Hungary, Poland, and it talks of how they're becoming a forgotten part of the world. At the turn of the century, that was a thriving part of Europe. It was really culturally significant, but as the Soviet powers started to grow and Russia began to fall out with the rest of Europe, it kind of seemed to split down the middle, and two big powers emerged. You had those countries on the west of Europe that were viewed as kind of culturally important. You've got the England, France, Spain, Italy, and things coming out of those countries were all viewed through a certain light. And then you had Russia on the east, and everything in the centre started to be historically overlooked. Here, Kundera talks about those countries that had their democracy constantly under threat from Russia, started to lose their cultural identity. It is a genuinely good read. It's probably only about 80 pages, and I got through it in about an hour and a half, but it does feel like a very important book. My sixth book this month was absolutely fantastic. It's by a writer that I've grown to really respect over the past year. It's Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. This is from a little bit later in Ishiguro's career as his work moved over to the kind of sci-fi genre. This tells the story of three young friends growing up in a boarding school called Hailsham, and it's clear that these people have a predetermined destiny. As the story progresses, we get to find more and more about that. It's clear that their education is being tailored to certain routes, things are being pushed on them, and lots of things are being held back from them. As the story progresses, it becomes clear that these aren't normal children. These are actually clones that have been created for the purpose of organ harvesting. This was an absolutely fantastic book. It throws up loads of really interesting questions. Things like the morality of scientific advancements. These are the kind of scientific advancements that are going to save millions of lives. What if you could find out that cancer could be absolutely eradicated from the world with no negative impacts to anyone currently alive? But the downside is that they need to create these clones who will eventually lose their lives so that those of us who came first will continue to live. When we say clones, we're still talking genuine people. These are people who have emotions, they can feel, and they want to live a full and exciting life. That is something they'll never be able to fully recognise in this dystopian world. I found this story to be really exciting, really interesting, and I never knew where it was quite going to go. I think Ishiguro is really good at telling those kind of bleak stories. He's got a really clear, concise way of writing with lots of nuance. I think you will really enjoy this read. My 7th book continues on that bleak dystopian theme, and that kind of works for me. Most books that could be introduced by the words bleak and dystopian tend to engage with me quite well. I don't know what that says about me, but this is another one that I really enjoyed. This was called Wavenhoe by Samuel Fisher. This is the story of a fallen Britain. It's set in the UK, probably 20 or so years from now, but something has gone catastrophically wrong. There's snow and ice everywhere, some kind of freak weather incident has happened. Maybe it's the result of global warming. They never really explain exactly what's happened. We just see the characters trying to deal with the fallout. We start in a scene in the woods and there's a young man who's clearly just been killed. Another villager stands over him holding an axe as other people arrive on the scene and see what he's done. Now, he doesn't deny what he's done, he doesn't try and explain it away, he just walks away, leaving the villagers to deal with the fallout. This leaves a potential Lord of the Flies situation, as these people don't have those kind of traditional mediums to lean back on when something like this happens. There's clearly no police who are going to come and arrest this man, no investigation is going to take place. They need to decide together how they're going to deal with it. As the story progresses, we see that it's not quite as clean cut as it appeared, and the man who was killed clearly wasn't a perfect individual. It asks some really interesting questions like, when society has fallen, what are the important things that you have to strive to protect? I did enjoy this. I read this over the course of one day, and in a very short time, I think Samuel Fisher does a really good job of making you care about the characters within. The book is only a little more than 150 pages long, and there's quite a lot of different characters in it that he really does build some good relationships with. Definitely worth your time if that sounds like your kind of book. My 8th book came from William S. Burroughs. He's one of the Beat Generation writers. The Beat Generation tends to be made up of people like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs. The book I've got here is Junkie, which is a semi-autobiographical novel about William S. Burroughs' time with addiction and drugs. It can be quite a harrowing book. He tells about some really tough times as he delved deeper into addiction to opioids, particularly heroin and morphine. There's some interesting stories as he talks about all the kind of things he had to do to get the money to pay for the drugs and what he had to do to actually source the drugs. He started off as a drug dealer, he then became more involved with the drugs himself. He was in with some very, very dodgy characters. There's many times where he has trouble with the law, it looks like he's gonna have to go to prison, so he often finds himself moving around from town to town, each time starting again in this kind of circle of chaos. He talks about the challenges trying to come off drugs and the different drugs he would lean on to try and support those processes. I found it to be a really interesting read. It's not the kind of book where you're really going to buy in to the main character, because, you know, he's clearly not a very nice man and he does some kind of awful things in this book. But it is interesting and it is exciting. The Beat Generation often takes a lot of influences from kind of working class American culture, but they come at it from the approach of really talented writers and poets. And I think this is a very, very engaging book. I'm definitely going to read some other things by William S. Burroughs. My 9th book is by Jeffrey Archer. Now, I've been recommended Jeffrey Archer loads of times and I've actually never read anything by him before. The book I chose is Nothing Ventured, which is the first of the William Warwick series of books. Now, I have to say, I actually didn't find this book to be particularly engaging at the start, and I kind of struggled to continue reading it. I'm told it's probably not Jeffrey Archer's finest work, so I might have to check out some of his other books, but it did take me a while to get into it. I have to say, by the time I was finished, I did quite enjoy it. There was some interesting twists and some nice little plots that are built in towards the second half of the book. The story is centred around William Warwick, who's a new police constable, and he gets assigned to a series of art thefts. It looks like there's been some kind of fraud going on, with original copies of major artworks being swapped out by fraudulent replications. There's some other plot lines that keep it all a bit more engaging. William's father is a quite well-respected barrister, and William eventually ends up dating a woman from one of the art galleries that are concerned with these thefts, and it turns out that her father has been locked up and she believes falsely in prison for a crime he didn't commit. So the question arises, could William's father actually represent this man and do a better job in setting him free if he is actually wrongfully imprisoned? It's not a bad read, but I did struggle with it a little bit. It wasn't quite as exciting as I hoped it would be. I do think I'll check out another book by Jeffrey Archer, so if you've got any suggestions of some really good books he's written, let me know in the comments below and I'll try to get to them. For my 10th book, I returned to Harlan Coben. Like I said earlier, when you hit that kind of reading slump, you need those kind of page turners to really get you back into it. Now the book I've chosen is The Woods by Harlan Coben. Now I chose this because it was actually free on Audible, so you could listen to it for no charge. I think that's still the case if you're signed up for Audible credits, so it's well worth checking out. Now this did exactly what I wanted. It gave me that page turning, thrilling experience, and I was able to steam through this in no time whatsoever. Though I have to say, it did kind of mirror the story that I'd seen earlier from Harlan Coben, and I do wonder, are they kind of cookie cutter experiences where you get a very similar story each time? The Woods talks of a man who this time lost his sister. His sister was murdered when they were at a summer camp when they were younger. She was murdered with another teenage boy, and a serial killer was arrested for the crimes, but they never found the bodies of the boy and girl who went missing. Now 20 years later, the brother of the woman who disappeared is approached by a policeman. Turns out that they've located a body that could potentially link to him. He gets there and the pockets of this man are filled with pictures of his sister. Now that is very odd, that is very unusual. He looks a bit closer at this man and he soon realises that he thinks he knows who it is. It's the man who went missing with his sister 20 years ago. But this body is fresh and this man has aged. He clearly wasn't killed that day. So maybe his sister wasn't killed that day either. It's got some really interesting twists. It is a very engaging book, though I have to say the story was very similar to Tell No One I read earlier. In fact, so similar that when I started getting ready to make this video, I considered the plots of each book and I couldn't remember what had happened in which book. I had to go away and check. Again, just like with Tell No One, I really did enjoy my time with The Woods, but I'm not sure it left me with much of an impact at the end. I definitely will continue to read some books by Harlan Coben, but I will use them as buffers in between some other styles of writing. My 11th book I picked up when I was around shopping for a bargain and I kind of liked the cover. It's called The Luminaries and it's by Susan Dennard. Now I'll be honest, you can't really see the cover in its full glory. I read this book in one sitting. I read it sat in my garden, I had some sun cream on, I was on the sun lounger, and I think the mixture of the hot sunlight and the oils in that sun cream have erased lots of the nice gold colouring on the front of this book. It looked interesting. I didn't know much about it. I thought The Luminaries sounded like a good title, so I checked this out. Now it was alright. This wasn't a fantastic book, but I did enjoy it, and again I read this one in about a day and a half, so it was quite gripping and it did keep me reading. I suppose this is a young adult book and it does fall foul to lots of the tropes that you start to see in those books where they've clearly taken inspiration from the likes of Harry Potter, The Hunger Games, Divergent, those kind of books. They've all got similar themes and similar tropes that do pop up. Now this book is about a group of people called the Luminaries. Now their job is to protect humanity from the nightmares that arise in Hemlock Falls. Hemlock Falls is a kind of special area where dreams come to life at night and these guys have to fight them off. Our main character, Winnie Wednesday, has been shunned by the rest of the Luminaries because her father did something kind of shameful. He was a traitor to those guys and let everyone down. Now they've not cast her out, but they've stopped her being involved in anything. But she does get the opportunity to audition to become a hunter, and she knows this is her kind of make or break moment. Either she steps up and delivers and is welcomed back in, or she doesn't. Now I did enjoy it. I think it was an interesting read, and I think Susan Dennard has done a good job of laying the groundwork for what could be some interesting sequels. I'm sure there is another one coming up very soon, and I probably will check it out. My 11th book is called Checkout 19, and it's by Claire Louise Bennett. Now I've had this suggested to me on the Kindle store many times, so it's been sat in my wish list for a little while, but I've never really had the chance to delve into it and find out what it's about. So I did, and I jumped in. Now this is a book about a young woman who loves books. That's the main theme throughout the story. She spends her childhood in books, throughout adulthood she becomes a writer, but she still has that love for books, and the story is broken up with lots of different passages about people's love for books and the impact they can have on you as a person. Now I am a sucker for that kind of thing in a book. Any book that is themed around lovers of books really does engage with me, and I do think that is a kind of cheat code to writing a book that will sell, because you see quite a lot of it nowadays. I piled through this book in a very short period of time, and I'm not really sure what I think of it. I don't think I really liked the writing style overall. I didn't really engage with the main character herself, the plot wasn't very exciting, it didn't make me really need to know what was going to happen next. But I do have to say, there were lots of individual passages that I just really enjoyed. Now I listened to this book, I didn't read it, I listened to it as an audiobook, and I feel like if I'd read it in the Kindle, I would have highlighted loads of different sections, and there was little bits that probably would have stuck with me very well. Now as an audiobook, I couldn't really be doing the same thing unless I sat down with a notepad jotting down what was being said, but there definitely was some fantastically quotable moments in this book. I just felt a little bit let down by the overall story itself. So should you check it out? Well, maybe. You might enjoy it more than I did. I do think it was quite well written. The main thing I didn't like was the writing style itself. It was very conversational, told as if someone is explaining what has happened in their life, but it was all told in a very odd way. The turn of phrases reminded me of the way that Gollum would speak, or even Yoda. It was very odd and I didn't really like it. I suppose it was supposed to come across as kind of stream of consciousness, but I just didn't engage with it. My 13th book was back to being another winner. This book was Sally Rooney's Beautiful World, Where Are You? Now, I've read all of Sally Rooney's books so far and I've enjoyed every one. I think she does a really good job of writing dialogue and getting you engaged with some really exciting characters. Now, I feel like this book must have taken some inspiration from her own life. It centres around 4 characters who are all flawed in their own way. They're all struggling with life and trying to get by. The 2 main characters converse with each other through letters as kind of pen pals, but really they're best friends who just don't get to see each other quite enough. They've all had rough childhoods, are trying to deal with adulthood in a way that they're kind of unprepared for. One of the main characters, Alice, is a writer who's had a bit of success but struggles to deal with social situations. And the way they describe her books and her style of writing kind of does mirror what we've seen from Sally Rooney's books, so I feel like maybe she's trying to base this character on herself, which gave the book another level and made it very interesting. I did enjoy the story. It's not particularly eventful. Sally Rooney doesn't really write those kind of epic stories with big events. They're more conversational, more nuanced, and really focus on the emotion and the characters within. I do really enjoy that style of writing. This was quite a long book and I ploughed through it in no time at all because it was such a good read. And I kind of feel like a Sally Rooney book is a no-brainer for me. Every time a new one launches, I'm going to be picking it up at some point and I'm likely to enjoy it. If you haven't checked this out yet, I recommend you do. That brings me to my 14th and final book of the month, in which I returned to a horror book that I previously read and really enjoyed. It was Red Dragon by Thomas Harris. Here I've got it in a multi-edition alongside The Silence of the Lambs. I read this because I was doing a video on the top horror books of all time and I felt like including Red Dragon, but I wanted to go back to it and ensure it did hold up, and it definitely does. Now this is an awesome book. It's the first in the Hannibal Lecter series of novels, followed up of course by The Silence of the Lambs, then Hannibal Rising. I've only read this and The Silence of the Lambs and I really enjoy them. Hannibal Lecter is a truly terrifying character, that kind of dark genius that you never know where you stand with. You don't really feel that you can ever have the upper hand. Even if he's locked up in a maximum security prison, you kind of feel like you're always at danger when he's involved. Red Dragon also has a second protagonist known as the Red Dragon, or the Tooth Fairy, and that is Francis Dollarhide. Now this is a damaged and disturbed man who had a very rough childhood. He was disfigured, he was secluded, in fact he was left for dead by his mother in the hospital, and that's gone on to shape him into the monster he does become. He takes inspiration from a famous William Blake painting and he creates this alter ego known as the Red Dragon, someone that is hell-bent on causing pain and destruction. These are 2 of the best villains in modern fiction and I really enjoy this book. I'm glad I went back and read it. I'm probably going to go back and read Silence of the Lambs again at some point, and I might go on to Hannibal and Hannibal Rising just to see how they hold up. But if you haven't checked it out, I really recommend you do check it out. It's rough. Some of the death scenes can be quite brutal in this book, and there's lots of psychological moments that really get you thinking about the impact those crimes have on the people surrounding them. But it's a genuine classic. If you haven't read Red Dragon yet, definitely check it out. So there you have it. That is my month in reading. I think there's been some really good books. Now I'd like to make this month just as exciting, so if there's any recommendations you think I should check out, please let me know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, then a like would be appreciated and I would love to see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Goodbye.